Hello and welcome to today's webinar sponsored by Sumo Logic. The title of today's presentation is It Odd to Shift Left? Building Elite DevSecOps Performers. And ODD is an acronym for Observability Driven Development. My name is Jenna Sargent-Barron and I'm the news editor for SD Times. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that this webinar will be available on demand through the sdtimes.com website in about 24 hours. Now moving on to today's webinar topic. As I mentioned before, we'll be talking about observability-driven development and how it can be combined with DevSecOps to maintain top-notch digital experiences for customers by shifting security and observability left. The goal is for you to leave today's webinar with knowledge of best practices in observability as code, how to prioritize your automation investments, and how you can begin shifting your team culture to enhance overall performance. Our speakers today include Colin Falwell, Field CTO of Observability at Sumo Logic, and Michael Riordan, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Sumo Logic. Now to get things started, I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Great, thank you so much, Jenna. So I know Colin and I are really excited about our conversation today around observability-driven development, or ODD, which is, as you can see in our title. And we're going to talk about specifically how organizations can build a culture of elite performance and how ODD can play a role in that culture and strategy. So to start off, I think we just want to set the scene with a view of how times have changed, kind of what that's meant for different teams within your organization, and how technology has kind of shifted our practices and our mindset. So Colin, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has changed in the last 10 or 15 years. We've gone from once a year waterfall to once every 6 month releases, massive releases, to a world where everything is loosely coupled. The monolith is being decomposed as we still carry around these box of doorknobs, but the rate of change and how things are done today, change goes into an environment multiple times per day. The QA process, dev used to flip it over to, QA, and they would test everything and they would just validate everything, and then it would go to production. Now that's really integrated into the dev process, into the dev life cycle. We see more and more automation in the QA process as part of, just the pull request, battery of tests going on, and merge request, to the state of where today elite performing teams, they have a deployable artifact every time they check something into the central repository. We see this also in security. Security used to be an afterthought, but it's becoming, now DevSecOps. And the reason for this is that, security can no longer be an afterthought. And the same things that we talk about in terms of observable systems with regard to performance and business capability, we see that in security as well. The same need of observability, the logs, the metrics, traces, all those things, security needs those. And we're seeing more and more of that security integrated as an automated component of the pipeline as well. And just in general, if you just look at across, IT and what IT used to do, it used to be that this, we just configured and maintain infrastructure. And today it's more about, unifying and standardizing the pipelines and providing developer self-service to development teams. And in fact, complexity is increasing, because of all of this change that we're going through, because of the acceleration of things. The stack is becoming more complex. There's a lot more open source that organizations are using. In fact, I think the metrics finally out that I think 100% of organizations are leveraging open source and one or many ways. And that change is accelerating because of this decomposition and because of this open source investment, or this utility of open source. We see an increase in the attack surface, from Kubernetes to supply chain attacks and open source libraries. And all of this is really pushing, data to the breaking point for many organizations. in order to observe everything that's going on, and especially observing things, I'd say, in the old way of doing things, which is to throw in agents, collect a bunch of data, aggregate all the logs, collect a bunch of metrics. It's more than most organization budgets can handle. And so there's this real need for cost justification. There's this real need for optimizing the telemetry pipelines in order to make sure that what you're collecting, what you're observing, is providing relevance to the business. It's providing relevance to IT, to the financial teams, and this is a great slide, right? This question of survival. You see so many organizations now that are upstart, that are smaller than 5,000 employees, that are coming into the market, that are disrupting finance. They're disrupting manufacturing. They're disrupting larger organizations because they're born cloud native. They're taking on things like observability driven development up front. They're moving everything left. And so for larger organizations that are well established, or that are trying to take market share, it's almost a question of survival at this point for many organizations to not face being disrupted, to be able to grow in merger and acquisition and capitalize and take on market share. They have to do things fundamentally differently if they're going to survive and thrive.
And that makes complete sense. And given the strange macroeconomic environment we're in, and kind of the pressures that all these different teams are facing, and the burnout, it really sets the scene for kind of why you should be thinking about ODD. Let's define ODD. So what is observability driven development?
Yeah, I mean, at its core, observability driven development is just a shift left of all the things that you need to think about as a developer, as a product manager, as a business, as somebody in finance, or somebody's that's responsible for business intelligence. So all the ops, I call it XOps now, right? It's DevOps, SecOps, FinOps, it's BI, it's data science, all your ML, your AI ops. Like, if you can get around this idea of what it means to build observable systems. What is an observable system? An observable system is something that you put into production. You put code into production, and the code will give you the feedback. It will emit the necessary signals to infer the internal state of the system as being healthy or not healthy. And it covers all of these different personas, right? So observability driven development, kind of like test driven development, it's a feedback loop. It's a philosophy, if you will. It's not necessarily just a practice. It's more of a philosophy, I think, kind of like site reliability engineering is kind of a philosophy. But observability driven development is this idea of, let's think about, what do we need to do to build observable systems? What do we need to curate in terms of key metrics, custom metrics out of the application code? What are the signals that we need in order to satisfy the knowledge that our system is healthy, it's secure, it's reliable, and it's functioning within the specification limits. And that's really, I think, the key term there is specification limits. In other words, when we build observable systems, we have to create a hypothesis that, hey, the software is going to operate in this way. And we're going to put specification limits, upper and lower limits around that. We're going to build a performance corridor, and we're going to measure that performance corridor. We're going to measure that metric or that piece of data that says the system is inside the scope or inside the specification limits to the level that we expect it to be. This is the basis for SLIs, SLOs, and reliability management, if you will, right? So taking the needs of the practitioners, the stakeholders, the business, and making sure that we codify that into everything that we do from a software development practice, so that when we roll new software, new features, new capabilities out into the market, and we do it faster and faster and faster, we're able to close that feedback loop as quickly as possible and provide the information that we need in real time. And so, why do this? The advantages of doing observability-driven development is that it's a forcing function for what I call capability of process. I didn't come up with this. It's actually goes all the way back to the industrial automation era, right? So if you go to the Handbook of Industrial Automation, you're going to find this idea of CP, which is this ability to measure your effectiveness at driving outcome. It gives you the ability to go, straight from development to production. Because if you're doing observability driven development, you want to put your code into production as quickly as possible. You want to test code in production. ODD gives you an avenue, a mechanism, a way of doing this, because this gives you compressed cycle times. It gives you better quality data. It exposes weak process. Do you have item potency in your data layer? Can you roll back transactions if you change the format of your of how you store data, or you extend your data model and you roll a piece of code into production and you need to roll that code out? Can you roll back and replay the transactions in the older format? For example, right? There's all sorts of things that come into play. But if you're going to stay competitive in today's market, you have to be going to production as quickly as possible. You can't afford to have code that gets written and developed and sits around in languages in a repository somewhere, or sits in a test environment or a lower environment for months and months and months. It's not generating value. Why write code if not for the reason of generating value? So if you're going to generate value as quickly as possible, and you're going to innovate quickly in the market, and you're going to stay ahead of these upstarts, you're not going to, you're going to sidestep, being disrupted. You have to move fast. You have to test in production. Test into production. You're going to do all of these things. Observability driven development is that vehicle to do it.
So it sounds a bit like you're saying to change a bit how existing processes and how the ways the world work. So do you want to speak to that a bit? Kind of like, how does that work culturally? What does that mean in terms of one's mindset? How does one go about this?
Yeah, I think if you step back and you look at just the world of like site reliability engineering and the evolution of SRE in the space, it's all about reducing toil and churn. So it's all about automating and eliminating what I call the traps within your process capability. If you're going to look at your process capability and measure the process effectiveness, how accurate are you? How long does it take to go from point A to point B in a process? How long does it take me to get through something into production? No matter what you're doing, the biggest barrier to achieving reliability and stability in process within IT, within business in general, is eliminating silos. It's eliminating ticket queues. It's eliminating where you have to stop and wait and rely on another team. If you're filing JIRA tickets, or you're going to another team, or you reach a point and, well, I can't go to production because I need this team to do this team to do this team to do this. Every one of those gates, every one of those ticket queues is a source of variability that you can't control. So if you want to eliminate variability, you want to move fast, you have to take all of these things that you're doing within your development, within your operations. You have to be able to overlay security. You have to bring all of this into the fold, if you will, of delivering or developing, ideating on, exploring, delivering, and developing and shipping software, which means it's got to be as automated as possible, which means that you have to rely more on the CI process to do a lot of this work up front, early in the life cycle. And you see a lot of open source tools now that are really jumping into this space, especially within security. We've had it a long time for, all of the things that we do within development. We're scanning software. We're looking for, outdated software. We're looking for, anti-patterns in code. Like, there's all sorts of tools out there, but we're seeing more and more in the security space start to move in as well. You've seen this also within, vendors like GitLab and others, where, they're really taking on this challenge of, providing safe and secure code scanning in the pipeline, doing this at CI, so that you don't have to worry about all of these things. It's not an afterthought. You're moving all of this into the automation frame of what it means to write, deploy, and ship software. No, this is great, right? I love this because it's like, if you look about it like this objective by discipline, there's always been this dichotomy between DevOps and SecOps. DevOps is all about doing great things, getting on the news. Is my code running? How well is it running? SecOps is about staying out of the news. We don't want to be in the news. We don't want bad press. And should the code be running? Right. And so, between those two things, why are those two things important? Because you've got something that is pushing the organization to move faster. Security is all about mitigation of risk, and trying to slow things down, because if you're going too fast, the risk profile increases. And then you have these two things. We talked about elite performers, the DORA metrics, right? DevOps Research Institute talks about the DORA metrics, which is your lead time for change, your change failure rates. You're talking about how long does it take to go from an idea to putting something into production, and what is the success rate of that happening, and if there is a failure, how long does it take me to recover from that failure and operate. And so those DORA metrics is all about compressing cycle times. It's increasing deployment frequency. It's reducing failure rates. It's lowering MTTR. DORA is satisfying really the requirements on both sides of that, DevOps and SecOps. But DORA metrics don't really do anything to talk about or really put emphasis on the need for how observability is going to unlock those capabilities. And every one of those things are capabilities, right? To compress cycle time, that's a business capability. And increasing deployment frequency, that's a capability. Those, when we talk about capability of process, those are capabilities we want to measure. We want to measure these things. So every capability we have, we should be measuring. ODD gives us a way to feed that data, to be able to build the process by which we measure those things. And so these are all very, I think, tightly complementary to one another. In terms of how we function within our development and engineering teams, all the way into the product management and business portfolio management, our financial operations, and ODD really truly, I think, is the basis of all of that.
So let's bring this to life, I guess, put a bow on it in terms of what constitutes an elite performing team. Like, what do you see as sort of the defining characteristics of an elite performing team, and maybe speak to any real life examples if you can.
Yeah, so elite performing teams are development engineering teams that can ship software. They can go from an idea or a hypothesis to putting code into production in less than 24 hours. That's pretty substantial, which means you're not spending a lot of time in UAT. You're doing most of your testing in the pipeline, and whatever testing is not done in the pipeline is actually done inside of the production environment. You're getting that feedback. You're doing canary or ring deployments. You're getting that instant feedback, and then you're deciding to keep the code in or take it back out and continue to iterate on it and put it back in. And it's also that less than a day for lead time. Then once you have something, you can get it into production in an hour. And if there's a failure in that change, you can get it resolved in under an hour, which is pretty mature. I mean, you've got to have a lot of process capability to be able to achieve the status of elite performer. And the number of organizations that, by the way, that have elite performers are growing. I mean, it's up to like 26% now from like 18 4 years ago. Oh yeah, there's that slide. But if you just step back one, right? It does begin with transformational leadership. The DORA, the DORA guide, if you will, or their research paper that they've done has a lot of great content in it about, what that transformational and culture really looks like. But you've got to invest in automation. You've got to really embrace, I think, going away from proprietary tooling and really embracing open source tooling. Because if you're going to build your own way of doing things, and all elite performing organizations are very customized, or I'd say tailored in the way that they do things. they're leveraging a lot of open source tooling, because if you've got proprietary tools in there, most likely it's proprietary data format, it's proprietary backends. You're not going to build an observability practice with proprietary tooling that's going to keep you locked into one vendor. You want to be able to continuously improve your observability. You want open source like OpenTelemetry to build that observability foundation on. And so you see a lot of the embrace of the open source to do this. And this makes it very easy, by the way, to shift everything left into observability, into, doing things as code. You can take the OpenTelemetry SDKs, you can wrap them, you can extend them, you can do all sorts of custom things that tie into your CI/CD process, that give your developers easier access to annotate and do things, in a control plane fashion from a code perspective. So you can put more of the production, I would say, production runtime and capability into the code base, along with the functional aspects of the code, and keep things very nicely annotated, very clean, and provides that the developer really the best of both worlds. And being able to interact with the CI pipeline, where scanning takes place, where alarms, thresholds, alerts, and all the things that are needed in other parts of the business can be output and curated into the pipeline very easily. And again, that's all just done by simple annotation and code. So I think elite performing organizations, they get around this idea. They start doing a lot of this automation, and they've got, buy-in at the top of the organization all the way down to really fund the investment in these sorts of non-functional things, but that are, really aligning the business and IT together.
And like you mentioned, they're on the rise.
Yep, they're on the rise. Yeah, big time. And that's, that kind of goes back to that point. It's a matter of survival, right? It really is a matter of survival to more established organizations that or industry that are out there, because you've most likely got an upstart, agile, cloud native, elite performing development team, and if you're an investment, in investments, and you're looking for VC, like, or organizations that are looking to where to put their money, or individuals looking to where to put the money, I'd be putting my money with elite performing organizations, because they're going to accelerate. They're going to take market share. They're going to do things fundamentally better than their legacy counterparts.
And let's speak to a real life use case. I know you mentioned that there was one boutique retailer that you thought really exemplified an elite performing team.
Yeah, I can't use their name, but they are out there. They've published a lot of content in that they've really kind of documented their journey. But they're an engineering team of about 200 engineers or so. They're in retail. This last year, during Black Friday and Cyber Monday and all of that, they don't have any production freeze. They don't even have that notion anymore, because production is their test environment. And they're not a small shop. I mean, they're boutique, but they produce a lot of volume. And they're free to push code to production at any time. There are gates that will stop something from going out. That has to do with the SRE teams. So their SLIs or SLOs, like if their service level objectives are below a threshold, it'll actually stop, new change from going in. And they'll actually, like somebody broke the build in production or in the pipeline. If the build is broken and the pipeline can't build anything because something in the pipeline is broke, everybody stops and goes and works on that until it's fixed. And then they go back to doing what they're doing. It's that same mentality, but with the production environment. Based on SLIs and SLOs. They mock. So if somebody writes a service, they write a mock for that service. That mock represents the service, as it's going to be in production. So other teams that are testing against that service, if they're going to consume that service downstream, they don't necessarily need a test environment to do that. They can do that with a mock. So if I'm writing a service that's going to consume your service, you give me a mock, I'm going to pretend to use your service with that mock. And what's great about that is taking that to the API layer. That gives me the capability. I don't have to go do anything. I can test my code in isolation, representing your code or consuming your code with the mock. And I can do a lot more testing on my laptop. I can do it in the pipeline. I can break test my code in the pipeline without needing your system to be up in production. So I can get a lot of that early validation as I'm going through and doing things, making sure that I've got my SLIs and SLOs codified correctly, those sorts of things, before I ever put my code into production. So that was something I thought that was really neat. And so they do all of that automated performance test in their pipeline. They'll break test things over and over and over just to see, let's make out the variability and let's get to the real strong signals that we see in the metrics and in the data, so that when we go to production, this is how we think it's going to operate in production. And now we're just validating that through the ODD process. And they do things like completely just destroy and rebuild their clusters on a weekly basis, not because they have to, but because it keeps them honest. This goes back to the capability of process. Very, very, very important is that, if you've got brittle systems in your environment, they're brittle because you're not touching them. It's maybe you've lost the people who knew anything about those systems or knew anything about that code, and people just try to avoid it and stay away from it. Those are the things that you should be looking for. If you want to be an elite performer, you should have nothing in your environment that's brittle. You should be able to have a deployable state at any point in time, straight from an artifact in your repository that was built on the last pull request, for example, or commit, I should say, and you've got robust analysis, logs. Logging is so important. But having the right data in the logs, curating the logs, having structured logging, being explicit about what you put into your logs. Having metrics that are emitting that are specific to the, telling the performance of the system and how that system is operating, because those metrics that come out might be used by another team to decide when to auto scale, their infrastructure and all the downstream infrastructure. So having logs, the metrics, the tracing, to be able to look at, that kind of exotic issues that might exist across, a transaction, having all of this data tagged to the feature level. That's really key. That's one of the things that really enabled this team or these teams to go straight to production, is that every time they put code into production, the data that gets emitted back is about that piece of code. It's about the feature. It's about what went in, and they're curating that information out and having a robust system for being able to do the log analytics and the aggregation and trace to the feature level to see the metrics at that feature level, whether it might be revenue metrics or something else. Taking that approach, putting that into practice, making it a skill that your development organization has. And having a common unified standard way of doing that across the organization means you've got, a common telemetry pipeline. You might have 1,000 different pipelines pushing code into production, but you have one way of shipping code and one way of curating that telemetry out. And that really frees up all of the possibilities when it really comes to things like, your innovation and ability to reduce risk and move fast.
Well, great. Thanks, Colin. I think that concludes kind of our upfront presentation, our prepared content, but I do think we have a couple questions we want to run through.
Okay.
So I can tee them up for you.
Sure.
So we've spoken a lot today about ODD, observability-driven development, but we've not talked a lot about the company we work for, Sumo Logic. And I know you mentioned logging is kind of very top of mind, such a critical piece of the puzzle. Can you speak a bit more about why Sumo's great at log management, log analytics, and sort of the other observability capabilities we offer?
Yeah, I mean, we started in logging. It's really hard to make something in the cloud that will scale. That's truly multi-tenant SaaS, which is something that I think we've done in spades and done probably better than anybody else, which is 100% cloud native log analytics platform. Which means it makes it very easy to get logs in from anything, from APIs, from other systems, from other clouds, from your systems, through open telemetry, through native collection. There's a million ways, even with things like Kinesis or Kafka, you can get data in. the point is that log analytics is hard, and being able to have robust machine learning and analytics that can in the pipeline can parse on demand, schema on demand. You don't have to do grok rules or anything. You just shove data in, and it's going to identify the variables, the things that are changing within the logs messages, things that are the common, things that are different. And that brings a lot of power to the platform to take a whole bunch of voluminous log data and crunch and reduce it down to just the things that are changing, or the things that are new, or the things that are different. Something that we call log compare, log reduce, and that's built into the platform, which is a great capability. And then we've also got all of the modern observability capabilities as well. So, and security. So we have one platform for robust log analytics. We have all the security analytics. We have Cloud SIEM. We have a Cloud SOAR product. So security analytics, analysis, being able to bring all of this in and manage everything from a security perspective, from a development and operations perspective, but then also to be able to lay over the things like the business and the custom metrics, and to be able to curate all of this data in a format that's open standards, that's built around a common entity model, and makes it very, very easy for any organization, any persona in an organization to come in and get insight out of the platform.
Great. And then another question we got is around feedback. So I'm sure feedback is a critical component to the way you kind of build an elite performing team and culture. How would you say elite performing teams deliver feedback to their engineers? Kind of what are some best practices around feedback?
No, I see a lot of this is really where I think I see elite performing organizations that I've interviewed and talked to. This is really where they break away. I mean, they're leveraging all of the interfaces and the tooling and the capabilities of the CI tools, but they're going a step further. They're extending and building their own CLIs to leverage for automation within the CI process. They're building a comms framework within the CI/CD tool chain that provides a more curated list of information or targeted information, and they're leveraging that with Slack, for example. They're pulling data out of, our customers are pulling data directly out of Sumo Logic. They're merging that with the CI. We're bringing the logs from CI into Sumo, and we're leveraging Sumo's capabilities for, tapping into things like Slack. And being able to go straight to, this boutique, they annotate the code, so that the code owner is actually expressed in the code, and code ownership and the responsible person, whoever's going to be, what team's responsible for what aspects of the services and systems. When there's an issue, the pipeline will tell, hey, on the check-in of that code, everything was good, or hey, it wasn't good. We're going to notify everybody that's responsible for that, PR. If you've got a big merge that's taking place, that's going into production, and something happens, all the owners of all the pull requests, or all the commits rather, that went into that merge, all get notification and status update. They get notified just one time. They also get notified when things are healthy again, and green. And so, building that feedback loop really just comes down to what is the relevant information that you need at what point in time do you need it, and how often do you need that information, and really being able to, I think, reach out and speak to the development organization's team and get consensus on that is important. But most importantly is just building the feedback loops. It's making sure that you've got the acquisition of the necessary telemetry and the application of that acquired telemetry to the personas that need it when they need it, and having a way to fund the effort of doing that within the organization. Paying attention to that is very, very, very critical, I think, if you're going to be an elite performing team.
Great. And then we have another question about open standards. I know you mentioned OTel, open telemetry, in this presentation. Can you speak a bit more around kind of why open standards, or sort of what the role open standards plays in your ODD strategy a bit more?
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. I mean, it really comes down to this. Like, if you're going to get around doing observable systems, if you're going to build observable systems, why would you build an observable system with a agent that you licensed from a vendor that's proprietary, that's closed? Why would you do that? Because if ever you go sideways with that vendor in the future, or you decide that there's a better backend that you'd like to use, you would have to basically take that agent out, and you would basically have to start over from scratch. And open standards like OpenTelemetry give you the capability to embed the SDK. It's open source. Anybody can contribute to the capabilities of what the library can provide. You can extend it. You can add to it your own internal version or flavor of it, and you can continue to pull down new features as they come from upstream in the core projects. But you've got your own layer or library, that you've wrapped, and so you can extend and customize. You can basically own the acquisition of the telemetry process, the process by which you employ to build an observable system. You should own that outright. You shouldn't have to lease that from somebody. You shouldn't lease your telemetry at the end of the day, because if you don't own it, you're susceptible to having to take many steps back just because somebody decided that this vendor's no good anymore. We're going to go another direction. Whereas all the vendors that you might use for analysis, post-production, if you will, right? Doing the aggregation and the analytics, everybody should be supporting the open standards. And if they're not supporting the open standards in a robust way, I would suggest maybe looking for, a vendor that does. And that's one of the reasons why you see us, really fully embracing open source, and everything that we do are open standards, whether it be metrics, logs, traces, security. We're standardizing, we're driving, common standards, because the world is better off when things can communicate and you have open systems interconnect between, you got open standards between. It abstracts away clouds, vendors, and everything else. And it really gives you the best of all worlds when you're trying to build something that's going to have longevity in terms of process and how you do things in your organization.
Great. And I think this is our final question for now. But, I think some folks may be listening to this and saying, wow, this sounds like a lift for my organization. This could be a big culture shift. What do you find to be some of the simple, maybe low-hanging fruit or simple ways to sort of move along toward the process of adopting ODD and becoming a elite performing team? Like, what are some simple steps that you think most orgs can take, today or next few months to move along?
It depends on what persona, right?
Yep.
It depends on a persona, I think. If you're a developer, if you aren't having conversations with other personas in the organization that are consumers of data, business data, your BI teams, your data science teams, your finance teams, your sales ops, your business operations teams. Go have those conversations, take them out to lunch, understand what their needs are. I think people just need to try to break down silos and communicate. A lot will start to happen when you do that, because it really is as a developer, I want to be a partner to the business, right? I don't want to just write great functional software that does, great functional things. I want to make sure that I'm, really also providing all the information that the business needs to be able to make, decisions about, how successful it is, right? If I'm also self-service DevOps now, I'm responsible most likely for the financial footprint. I'm responsible for how expensive it is for my code to run in production. So I want to have an agreement on how are we going to measure that. Are we going to go to cost per transaction? Are we doing cost per customer? Like, how much does it cost to provide this feature, and does that feature generate positive cash flow? Deciding on how things get measured and standardizing those processes around how things get measured is very, very important. I think you really have to start there. But again, I think if I were to go all the way back, it really starts with that transformational leadership. find the agents of change in the organization, come together around, figure out what the needs are for your organization to start moving forward. It's easy enough to just start taking requirements for observability and thinking about them up front when you're writing a new piece of software, thinking about a new piece of software, a new microservice or whatnot. Just think about it up front. Bring your security partners along. Think about what can we automate? How much of this can we automate? How much can we get away? Can we break away and build a team in an organization that's larger than 5,000 employees that might have older standards or ways of doing things, audits, controls, and those sorts of things like financial institutions? Can you break away and create a group inside the organization that can go start doing things straight to production? Show that it's successful, show that you can do it in a secure and reliable way. Then you can start to, kind of cut your teeth on what does that blueprint look like and start taking it and bringing more parts of the organization along and having them adopt, because it is a change of everything in how you do things, right? It's a change in culture. It's a change in process. It's a change in how you measure things. It's being more scientific about how you measure things. And that takes discipline. It takes longevity. It takes, consistent application and focus on doing this and breaking things up, I think, into, this is kind of step 1, step 2, step 3, and really kind of moving along that curve of maturity and adoption within the enterprise.
Awesome. That was great. I want to thank you both for kind of lending your time to us, so that our audience could learn more about this.
Our pleasure.
Thanks again to Sumo Logic for sponsoring today's webinar.
Thank you, SD Times.